So the idea is 90 people meet here, and they're met by Lewis and 5 other guides who have, been trained and coached in the process of taking people in. So people know they're coming here to experience something with ravens, and it's going to be a roost of ravens. So they set off from here, so in groups of 15, so they were sort of staggered.
Yeah. It's like a guided walk.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. Okay.
So as soon as people leave, it's the start of the experience, because it's actually engaging with the forest, the reality of the forest, as well as the sounds that we put in. Well, this is the first part of the walk in. And the first part is you'll learn about, or you're told about Kielder Forest, why it's here. Because Kielder Forest is in fact man-made forest. It's the largest man-made forest in Europe. And they start going up through this open patch and then to a brow on the top. This, apart from having a beautiful view, particularly at sunset, this is the place where people will be told about ravens, the natural history of ravens, and also the significance, the status and significance now in this part of the northeast England, and the ambition about their slow return. So it's also a point to see this astonishing view. That's the path we're taking along that right hand side of Walks Burn, but you can see that's mature forest, and that's where we're headed for the piece. But what's interesting about things like this, when people learn about the forest, is to realise that this is a managed forest, because some people who come out from Newcastle won't realise, that this is a managed landscape. And so part of the piece is to learn something about the forest, and why these drainage ditches are cut, and why trees are felled and why others are left.
It's brilliant, absolutely right.
So we're walking alongside the Walks Burn, which is significant again in terms of the piece, because it's quite dominant as you walk down there. We notice now we start to ebb away from it, so the sounds change again, and your hearing will become more acute to what's happening in this more mature section, because we're coming up to the point, the sort of end point, where conversations will cease, and then we'll enter into the space where the piece is being played. This is it. This is the end point of the walk-in. So we chose this point because of the bridge, with the sense that, as I've said, we had this sense of this is the portal into the world of ravens, because the roost will happen in this piece that's in front of us. But the guides here at this point will tell people about raven lore, going back to Odin in particular, Norse times, and the significance of them being totemic birds, in particular with the Scottish notion as well, that these birds were had the transition from the real world to the spirit world. Having heard and recorded those conversations, that was really the key inspiration for the piece. So I'm really interested in putting people in that unique environment. People will then be asked, because this is a wildlife experience, to keep the conversations now to absolute minimum, because once you cross that portal, you're into the world of ravens, and you choose your spot on the forest floor to wander around, sit down, lie down, listen to the forest for 10 minutes, and then slowly and imperceptibly you'll start to hear the birds arrive over your heads in the hundreds and hundreds, and then start to settle in the trees directly overhead. So let's choose this roughly as the centre point of the piece. And so these are even-aged trees, 30 odd years old, Sitka spruce, like pencils, James Aldred described them. And so he's able to climb and rig these trees without leaving marks, which I thought was really considerate. Because of his experience, he doesn't really want to damage the trees in any way. But they don't have branches, so the speakers, we were talking about those tall, thin Mayer speakers, obviously not in the middle, but around the edge, he would fix them vertically to the trunk. And the idea is the technology's not really obvious. Yeah. So this is it. People find a spot on the floor, sit down, lie down, sit on convenient logs. So I've not quite decided what the end cue will be, but I like to think it will be something like a tawny owl call, which will indicate a nocturnal bird, which will indicate to people that the piece is closing or is closed. This is the site where the work will take place, Hrafn, conversations with Odin. And of course, it's still a forest, but it's been transformed a little bit in the extent we've put a lot of seating out, we've cleared some of the scrubs, cleared some of the trip hazards. The most important thing is the sound of this work, and you may well be wondering how we get speakers 15 metres up these coniferous trees. Well, fortunately, we've got a good friend of mine and one of the world's foremost tree riggers, James Aldred.
So the first thing we need to do is to get our working line up in the tree so we can be safe when we're up there. Normally we would use a catapult to fire a line up over a load-bearing branch, but as you can see, these trees don't have any decent sized branches. All of these are dead snags. So we have to treat it effectively like a telegraph pole, which involves using climbing spurs to actually spike up the tree with a flip line around the back of the trunk, which gets us into a position where we can then put a top anchor in, rig our pulley line. Then we have a couple of guys helping us lift up the speaker from the ground. So the heavy work is done for us, which is really nice. They then hoist it up, and we then begin the process of transferring the weight from the pulley line across to the ratchet straps. But the tricky thing here has been not trashing the tree too much. In an ideal world, we'd get rid of all these little snags, make it a lot easier to work. But of course, if we do that, it's going to break the spell. It needs to look quite wild, doesn't it?
Well, this windowless U-Haul trailer is in fact the heart of the piece, because we're playing out from here. The recordings that I made on Anglesey a few years ago of the Raven Roost have been composed into a piece which we're playing out here. The Hrafn, Conversations with Odin, comes from this. So the sound files are composed into a particular work and pattern of the roost, and are being played out from this computer and being spatialised through Tony's computer into this ambisonic format. This is fantastic. After all this effort, this is such a great collaborative piece. I'm stood in the forest, Kielder Forest by Stonehoff, the middle of the afternoon, and we are surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of ravens coming into roost. What may seem very early, but in fact this is the piece it's playing. It's just fantastic. It's exactly as I hope, because the technology is transparent and the sound clarity is astonishing. You can't help but look up, because overhead you imagine seeing hundreds and hundreds of huge ravens flying into roost in the trees directly overhead. It's got such a great spatial element to it. It's really fantastic. So I imagined it in my head over a year ago when when Iain and I put this proposal together.
What we're going to do for the next 45 minutes or so is I'm going to walk you through the whole event. So we'll walk down to the site, and on the way I'll tell you a lot more about what it's going to be and what the roles of the volunteers are going to be. We'll have a look around the site and then we'll come back up here. We'll have a little bit of time then before other people arrive. We've invited friends and family to come along and be our audience for this tonight. We don't expect to have massive numbers, but we will have enough to run the show as it would be. On the walk, we're talking through a number of things. The main thing for us with our volunteers is that they are guiding people along the route, making sure that no one gets lost. We're looking at any hazards that are underfoot and identifying them so that they can be pointed out along the way.
Good evening. Right, this is the last position before we enter the site of the installation, which is just over there in that part of the woods. When we cross this bridge, I'll lead you into the site where you can sit down, stand or lie, whatever's comfortable. And over the following 40 minutes, we'll hear the sounds of Chris's installation. So in Norse mythology, the Norse god Odin had two ravens, Hugin and Unin, who would sit on his shoulders. He'd send them out into the world, and on their return, they'd report back on what they'd seen.
Our site is an oval that goes long ways from that side to this side. So you can see it's not quite as wide over there. All the groups have gone in, everybody's sat down. Chris is the last group in. He will give a signal to our technical manager, who will then, once people are sat down and ready, that's when the piece begins. Starts off very quietly, so we'll have a couple of minutes of just adjusting ears to the natural environment here.
It's so great when things come together like this. What I like as well is the collaborative aspect of it. So from everybody, Jerwood, Forestry Commission, Iain and I working together with people like James, the tree rigger, the climbers, electricians, all the sound people, all the volunteers. We've had great voluntary support, and now they can all get to hear and experience this work.